The long-term strategy with my books is to get it into retail, to change lives, to have people pick them up, to enjoy the cover, the smell of the paper, to create a book that's like an art form. And if that's my long-term strategy, then I can kind of talk about, well, why are we so obsessed with the bestseller? So we'll see. If media isn't interesting on that and they tell me no, then what I could do is I could also write it as a blog post on my own blog to create SEO and probably attract clients.
What's up, everyone? I'm so excited for this week's episode of the Small Business PR Podcast. We have a very special female entrepreneur and mother who is joining us. Her name is Angela Engel. She's incredible because she has over 20 years of experience in the book publishing space. And what she's doing now is elevating the voices of independent authors. And she's going to share with us today how she's been able to not only do that, but also get her authors and get herself in the media to share her story. So welcome to the show, Angela.
Hi, it's good to be here, Gloria.
So you've been on so many podcasts. You've been on Publishers Weekly. You've talked about so many different facets of your life, not just what you do. So can you just share with us really quickly, like all the different media opportunities that you've landed for yourself?
Yeah, definitely industry media, which is Publishers Weekly and tons of reviews, whether that's been in Library Journal or Kirkus Review. We work with Shelf Awareness. We work with all different types of industry magazines. And we've been able to land, for example, Shelf Awareness ran a blog article what my marketing manager wrote on LGBTQAI bookstores across the country. She wrote this beautiful piece and just sent it to our industry, and they were like, wow, we'd love to rerun this, kind of highlighting these bookstores across America. So we've been able to kind of do stuff like that, as well as from a mainstream perspective, I recently got in Business Insider, which is exciting. Thank you as well. And our books have been seen in Real Simple magazine, in Parents. I wrote, actually, I think after taking your course, a great opinion piece. I'm a mom and a publisher for Parents magazine. And that was really a gift to be able to write that for them. And sort of from a mother perspective and a publisher perspective, what I look for in children's books. So that was really fun. So I've been able to kind of write a lot of different things and been seen both in the mainstream media as well as industry.
I mean, that is absolutely fantastic. I think a lot of times founders, when they're approaching PR, they think they have to pitch with their expertise, their actual, specific industry. But you've been able to carve a story for yourself outside of just being a book publisher. So can you talk to me a little bit about kind of the mindset shift that you had to make in order to talk, on topics that are more maybe relevant and resonating to you, such as motherhood or entrepreneurship, and how you were able to pitch those stories?
Yeah, it's funny. Today, actually, I was on a Zoom call with a prospect client and kind of laughing how like everyone now is an entrepreneur versus a small business owner. My husband and I are both business owners, and he runs an accounting firm for the last 15 years. And he would never think of himself as an entrepreneur, would think of himself as a business owner, right? I have an accounting firm, I'm a business owner. And so to shift this mindset for me to be like, wow, I've really launched and I'm an entrepreneur essentially. And I do not like the word, nor never want the word. I've been asked this, mompreneur, and I feel that's really degrading because we never say dadpreneur, right? For a male. So I really say I've been asked that a lot lately about from a media perspective. So I really take my motherhood seriously, and I always say I can't divide myself, right? I'm a mother. I have a partner. I'm a wife, but I'm also like a business owner and have had 20 plus years with a career. And so I'm very clear with that. My gender happens to be a woman. And yet, I'm very specific that as I'm an entrepreneur, not a mompreneur.
Yeah, I love that. I learned something new as well because I never really thought about it that way. I think you're right that, wow, like if we don't say dadpreneur, why are we saying mompreneur? So thank you for that. You mentioned that you've written 2 op-ed pieces for Publishers Weekly, obviously lots of podcasts. For a lot of the listeners out there, can you explain to them what is an op-ed? Who are they for? How do you pitch it? And why are they valuable?
Yeah. So the first one I wrote was an opt-ed sort of why publisher partnership publishing. But I had to pitch it in the way like, what would that mean to my industry? So I pitched this concept of like, what is the solution in partnership publishing? Like when we look at why is because there's this like within the industry, there's sort of this battle going on right now. There's self-publishing, there's hybrid publishing, there's traditional publishing, and this wave of like this argument essentially that's happening, like a steam, like how should I get published? And I sort of wrote this op-ed piece like, let's stop breaking these like this argument and break down really what's the model and ultimately what model is going to work best for the writer, for the author, and be more that kind of service versus one's better than the other, right? And so I pitched that idea and they liked it. So I wrote an op-ed piece about, I do partnership publishing, which is that has an element of custom publishing for brands. It has an element of that we do our own concepts and ideas. If you imagine one of your favorite children's books might be from a National Geographic or a Scholastic publishing house, they've come up with those concepts themselves and publish them. They're kind of authorless. We do that kind of work that's been in publishing forever. But we also work with authors and entrepreneurs, and we let them invest in their work so they own their own intellectual property, their IP, which is very, very different than traditional publishing. And yet why Amazon has grown in the self-publishing model is this concept and talk about intellectual property. So I kind of talk about that in the op-ed of like what those sort of terms mean, and I think that really speaks to our that audience, which is a book audience who's already thinking about those ways that we're making content. So that pitch worked, and then recently I just pitched an idea about banned books. So within the industry, banned books has been a huge, huge topic. I know in mainstream media, you might have read an article in the Washington Post or the New York Times and something about the banned books, Mouse in Tennessee, and what's happening in Texas, Texas is the largest state for banned books, what's been happening in Florida, and then also what Whoopi Goldberg said on The View. So there's been a lot of that kind of on social media and in some of the mainstream. Well, within our industry, we have been talking about banned books for a very long time. And banned books actually has a dedicated week, and librarians are very, very advocates of making sure their libraries are still supporting some of these very important works and banned books. So what I did is, what was bothering me though, is that I was watching the bestseller lists, and I was watching Mouse on the bestseller list now that it was a banned book. And I'm a granddaughter of Holocaust survivors. So I pitched this to Jim. I said, the distortion of history, right? When we banned a book, we're essentially like trying to distort this historical narrative. And when we only allow books about the Holocaust that are honestly like an Anne Frank, the Diary of the Anne Frank, the hero is a Gentile, right? Is somebody who's non-Jewish. And so all of the ones that are okay for people to read, the hero, there's hero, versus Mouse is tragic and shows the violence and the reality. And so I said, could I write an op-ed piece on this? And within 5 minutes, the head of all the news within PW wrote me back an email and said, absolutely, we would love you to write an op-ed piece on it.
Wow. Wow.
Because I just said, this is how I feel. Yeah. This is my family history. And I wrote an op-ed piece that recently got published. It has seen over 4,000 plus views on LinkedIn. Yes. And I have been pinged now from all over the industry, from book buyers to librarians to old colleagues that have said, thank you for writing this piece. Because one thing I wrote in the op-ed piece was this. When I launched this business, and this is a small business podcast, I never, ever thought of myself to say I'm a Jewish woman-owned business. And this is what I write in the op-ed piece. I never thought of that. I've been always like, I'm a woman-owned business, by women-owned, small business. But to actually come, like, kind of step into this reality of that I'm Jewish and a granddaughter of Holocaust survivor is really scary, right? It's
Yeah.
scary because of my history. So that's what I write about and I show pictures of my my grandmother, her in the stores in Germany that were all burned and to the ground during Kristallnacht. And so to say, hey, I'm a Jewish business is extremely scary, right? Because of my family
Yeah.
history. So that was the first time in the 4 years that I launched my business that I actually came out and wrote and kind of stepped into this fact that I couldn't be silent because of what happened to my own family. And in that,
Yeah.
I actually got a wonderful feedback, but it was really actually scary. So I guess my thing to entrepreneurs is sometimes we do have to sort of do things we might be a little less uncomfortable with, but I think the
Yep.
reward was great.
100%. I mean, first of all, thank you for sharing that story. That's really inspiring. It's a great testament to when you do take a stand, maybe it's contrarian, maybe it ruffles some feathers, you're always going to attract the right people, right? And so in that case, you got a response 5 minutes later. I also love what you took, using the CPR method is the relevance piece. You talked about how you tied it to what's happening with Amazon, what's happening in Texas. So I'm hearing the theme of relevance come up. And I love that you're now thinking in a way of not just saying, here's my business, here's my company, here's what I'm doing, but you're also adding that piece of relevance, which is so, so key. So how has like the relevance piece or maybe the CPR method like transformed the way you thought about pitching yourself and your business?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think for me, when you're seeing books that are banned on bestseller lists, right? I thought to myself, for the first time, this feels tongue in cheek, right? And I can imagine, as we saw in the Black Lives Matter movement, how many people flocked to the stores and made books bestsellers, right? And yet, how do we move beyond that tongue in cheek, right? And so I think that's what I really spoke to was this relevance that if we are trying to talk about AAPI issues and Black Lives Matter and DEI work, we have to move beyond just buying a book and making it a bestseller, right? Or watching something
Mhm.
on or posting something on your social media channel, right? Posting like, hey, I'm part of this movement. Okay, well, were you part of that movement for 24 hours, for a week, or are you continually
Yeah.
trying to do the work? And I think when you dedicate yourself to the work, you're actually going to get more media because the media wants to talk to experts, people that are
Mhm.
doing the work all the time. And so I think my success has been like my consistency.
It's amazing. I mean, consistency is key, right? And
Yes.
and the fact that you are a conduit of information, which is also something we talk a lot about in the starter pack, is you're elevating the voices of other storytellers, so you actually can offer up to the journalist and say, "Hey, I also have these other people who, if you want to interview, like I'm happy to connect you with." So, is that kind of a hack that you've tried
Oh,
to be of value to the journalist?
100%. We have a book right now called A Little Less of a Hot Mess, which is the best title. And it's really, dealing with anxiety. It's written by a therapist. It's a mom's guide. And absolutely, I have two now leads for her that they want her to write op-ed pieces on anxiety. I mean, she's a real deal. And this came to just media talking to me, who's on my author list. Hey, I'm really interested in that piece. I also was just recently interviewed by Publishers Weekly on pivoting in COVID and how these shipping delays and things that we've been printing. But
Ah,
they quoted and talked about some of the important books that I've published. One being Dear White Women, which was written by two Japanese
mhm.
and white women, two BIPOC women who are the founders of Dear White Women podcast. And that book is like 6 months, 7 months old, right? Yet it was interesting that that's the book that Publishers Weekly has sort of looked at my press and been like, hey, this is really interesting work. And we'll cite it in an article 7-8 months later.
That's amazing. So it's about planting the seeds and having that long-term relationship, because I think a lot of times, and you know this, when you first started and you joined the PR starter pack, like you sent some emails and you didn't get a response right away. You could have just been like, okay, well, this is not going to work. Right. But you took a long-term view and you kept following up. So can you tell me a little bit more about how you followed up, how you were able to land, whether it's the podcast or parents or whatever it is? Has there been a time when you have landed something without follow up?
Hmm. I mean, I did hire help, and I think that the interesting thing is some has happened in that in the branding section, but I still think it's me that's pushing, me that's following up. So no, I mean the short answer is that you always have to follow up.
Yeah.
But I sometimes do different message ways. Like for example, it might be that I've DM'd this reporter for Parents Magazine, for example. I wrote this great piece. I'm a mom and a publisher, and they asked me to write for them, which I'd never thought of. I was like, really? I guess that's true. I'm a mom and a publisher, and so I can recommend children's books, right? Because this is Parents Magazine, who their audience is, are parents, and their parents are looking for great children's books to read. And so they asked me to write a piece of how do you choose a great children's book. Now,
Great.
once I wrote that, they loved it. And so then I followed up with them with one of my authors to write, I'm a life coach, and sort of here are some of the ways that I work on grieving, right? And so, and one of my authors was able to write in that same way for them. And then I recently just pinged them about another thing, not on an email, but a DM, because I was watching their social media feed, the reporters, and then I was noticing what they were talking about, and it brought to me another concept or an idea. So I DM'd them and was like, hey, I have this idea about women right now in post-pandemic parenting. And she was like, absolutely, send me the pitch. So I think that it's like also rethinking your angle sometimes, or watching what these reporters are talking about, and again, staying relevant.
Yeah, exactly. And it's really the energetic law of like reciprocity. Like the more you put time into following the journalist's work, the more they're going to be like, this person really cares. So like, why wouldn't I feature them again? Right. One of the hacks, especially as you know, because you've gotten onto many podcasts, is like at least listen to the podcast. Like 99% of people who pitch me on my podcast, you can tell they've never even listened to it. So even if you are that 1% that actually has done just 30 seconds of research, that puts you like way above the rest.
Yeah, absolutely. Like I'm doing this I'm going to be a guest next week on a creative podcast. And this was really, really cool. He's a professor as well as a lawyer in intellectual property. And we did like an informational interview. And it was so interesting to me that I was like, hey, also, could you send me, I said to him, 2 or 3 episodes that you would recommend I listen to before I'm a guest on your podcast? And he was like, absolutely. I almost would think he was shocked because he was never asked that question. And so I
Mm,
also think it's really important too. You could also be like, hey, I've listened to this episode, but this is what I'd like to talk to you about. Could you recommend a couple of episodes you would recommend I'd love to listen to? So that's
yeah.
been a really successful for me when I do stuff like that.
Okay, so now you've done, you've written for the op-eds, you've spoken on a podcast. Now, what if someone is not quite ready to write an entire op-ed, or if they don't feel confident as a writer? Do you have any tips about just pitching and having the editor or the journalist interview them and having them, kind of use their editorial discretion?
Yeah, 2 things. I did get a really cool piece in Hadassah magazine by a writer. And how did I do that? I honestly had a phone call with the business development person of the magazine. And we were like talking about bigger picture issues, like all this kind of stuff. And Hadassah magazine and publishing, like what does it have to do with each other? Well, they have a book review section. And so I was just talking to them about our own authors, How do we get them in? Like just asking those questions versus me. Well, then they kind of got asked about my backstory and all this stuff and thought it was so interesting, connected me with a feature editor. So I think that sometimes it's just honestly reaching out to like a business development, what magazines, what other, like maybe you have a product, like a shopping bag or something that you create, like talk to them about like the product features or like the gift guides roundup. But then maybe when you're talking to them, you get your bag and the product guide, right? You can also just talk to them about what you do, what your business is, what your passion is. And then there ended up being an article about me and my family and like what draws me to publishing, because in the end, there is not a lot of uh, businesses, like woman-owned publishing businesses, especially Jewish. So the Hadassah magazine person was like, "Wait a second, we would love to feature you because
Yeah.
our readership is women, and they would be interested that your business even exists, right?"
Yeah.
So I think it's sometimes pitching to around the magazine. What's the magazine doing that they might have? What is their readership, and why would
Yeah.
you be interesting to their readership?
I love that. And it's again, it's about giving value and being of service. And if you the energy of the pitch is please be my free advertising vehicle, then they're gonna say no. But if it's like, here's what I'm noticing, right? Using the CPR method, here's what I'm noticing. Have you thought about this? And then you strike up a conversation, follow them on social. Absolutely, you can keep getting press after press feature. That's totally possible. And you've proven that.
Yeah, so I think that that is the better way. It's just than hearing no, realizing, like, for example, right? I really want to publish like the top 10 women in publishing doing like disrupting the mold, right? But all the feedback we've gotten from reporters is this feels promotional. And I'm like, how is this
Mm.
promotional? I'm trying to like lift up me as well as like all these amazing other women within my industry. And so now I have to rethink the angle, right? Has been the feedback. So now I'm thinking, okay, everybody's obsessed with having a bestseller, right? Everybody's obsessed with having an Amazon bestseller, and they'll pay like all this money for advertising and they get their Kindle as a bestseller. But
Yeah.
why? Like like is that ego? Is that narcissism? Like why are we so as a society obsessed with a bestseller? So my next angle to reporters is going to be like that, because I actually think that's an interesting article that I would read. So that's also been my next theory is like, okay, well, if they're telling you no, that sounds promotional, but think about like what would be an interesting angle or headline that you would read and or that you've read kind of within this newspaper or
Yeah.
magazine.
Yeah, and that's why installing a Google News alert is so key, right? Because you start to marinate into your brain like what are the subject lines and you start to understand, the eyes and ears of a journalist. So 100%. I have another question to ask you is, when before you obviously we met and you were thinking about doing PR, now you're a media pro, right? And now you're not only doing media for yourself, you're also landing media for your authors. So my question is, what is the biggest misconception about doing your own PR and pitching? Because for a lot of people who are just afraid to take the leap or they think they need to save up all this money for a PR agency, what have you discovered to be true for how this DIY kind of framework works?
um, I think that like what you have to know that like you just have to like I think I've talked about this. You have to just set aside time. So you have to set aside time, and that is my biggest hurdle, the hardest thing. But like really thinking about okay, what is in this hour? What could I accomplish? Like, could I take a Google Doc and just literally write down all the different kind of headlines or angles that I'm thinking today? Could what also actually has helped is sometimes recordings from podcasts or coaching. Like I actually see a coach, okay? And what I'll do is I'll listen to the transcript after. I'll listen to the podcast and I'll read my transcript after a coaching session call. And there are such good nuggets within there in that transcript. I literally will copy paste it in a Google Doc, and then start thinking about it in terms of how can I take what I'm saying and craft it into a pitch. So I guess that's my biggest advice, which I'm going to give a shout out to my life coach. But April is fantastic, has really actually been able to give me some real interesting, in-depth ways of actually making myself a pitching angles. Actually, my opt-ed piece for Publishers Weekly on banned books from mouse came out of my anger in a coaching call.
That's amazing. I love that so much. So always be thinking about angles, always thinking about how you can be relevant, even outside of your immediate role or title, which is what you've done. And you've pitched stories about your heritage, your background, your ancestors, the fact that you're a mom, the fact that you're a publisher. So it just goes to show that there are so many opportunities, right, to get yourself featured. Is there anything else that now that you've done this quite a few times, anything else that you've noticed or any hacks that you want to share with our audience who maybe have not started pitching yet and they just want to get that first media feature?
Yeah, I mean, I think, when you're talking, the first word that comes to mind for me is vulnerability. I think that the fact is that we all are vulnerable, and it's okay to be. And what's the worst that can happen is that someone tells you no. That is not that bad. Okay. If you are an entrepreneur or a small business owner, you're going to have to get used to no's. And so
So
I
good.
think, like, to be honest, I just feel you have to be vulnerable, and all humans are. And if you can just, like, own that. And sometimes when you follow up, or you can say, hey, can you just be honest with me, like, why you didn't take this? I did get the feedback that felt too promotional, but that feedback is what allows you then to write or think about other things. Like, so I was like, okay, I'm going to move on from this list. I'm going to not be attached to it. And I'm going to start to think about Amazon bestsellers. I'm going to go around and do a whole new thing. And because I can't speak to that, because my books, I'm not as obsessed with the 1 week that my book will be an Amazon bestseller, because it will, and it's great, fine. That is not the long-term strategy. Just like PR, the long-term strategy with my books is to get it into retail, to change lives, to have people pick them up, to enjoy the cover, the smell of the paper, to create a book that's like an art form. And if that's my long-term strategy, right, then I can kind of talk about, well, why are we so obsessed with the bestseller? So I thinking, like, okay, that's interesting to me, because, and we'll see if media isn't interesting on that and they tell me no, then what I could do is I could also write it as a blog post on my blog to create SEO and probably attract clients. So I also want to encourage business owners to write a blog, to practice that, and how that can attract clients, because I do that.
Yeah, I love that. And everything that you've said, right? You didn't lead with, here is my company, here's what I'm doing here. Like you're leading with the idea, the topic, the insight. And then of course, in the course of the interview, they're gonna ask about what you do, right? But I love how you're not leading with that, and your pitch is not like, talk about my my independent publishing company. It's so much more. It's like, here's what I've learned, or here's what it's like, or how the pandemic has changed publishing. So can you talk a little bit more about kind of the mindset shift? Because I think for so many people, they still are thinking that the pitch is literally they have to get to a certain place in their business, or they have to make it big in their business before they are worthy to be covered. And that's just simply not true.
Yeah. I think imposter syndrome, right? People like to talk about that. I'm always like, what is that? Like, I mean, we all have insecurities, right? We all have these things we've gone through. For me, I feel I'm deserving. I've been in the careers for over 20 years, and I spent, the first 15 years in more of corporate environments, working for others, like doing large trade shows, traveling while I had babies, essentially, all over the country, and leaving the babies, going to go present in big corporate companies. And so I feel I have something to say. I feel like,
Yeah.
my oldest is going to be 14 years old. And 14 years ago, there was no pumping stations at an airport. We literally pumped in a bathroom stall at the JFK airport, or like that was it. But you didn't have these luxury. Also, I remember when I got to go visit Amazon corporate, the first time I found a beautiful pumping room was with my second child. And I was like, wow, what is this? I'm used to pumping like in a utility closet at the Javits Center. So like, I just think like that mind shift, like I'm now able to talk about it. Like even if my company, right, the Collective Book Studio is not as 100-year-old company established like a Workman or an Abrams or some of the people that I really admire in the industry. I have also worked for some larger companies and can kind of talk about other things about what it means to take this huge leap of faith to start a business, as well as the transition from being a young career person to having children and still keeping your career, and like all of those things, those are interesting to people. Like, so I think if people can kind of tell their story, it will then tell them why did they create this product, right? So when people start to talk to me about my story, they actually realized, oh my God, no wonder she's a publisher. She's done all of this work in books, selling to Costco and Target and BJ's. I mean, you name it, if it has a shopping cart, I've probably sold to that account. So that's my background. So it's gonna come up naturally.
Yeah, I love that. It's not about, it's your story, but also why is that important, right? Is because you can help people, you can share insights, you can overcome bias or whatever that
Yes.
is, right? So it's not just leading with your story, but why? Why does sharing your story matter? How is it going to make a positive impact? And I think you've hit the nail right on the head.
Yeah, and that's what I tell people who want to write a book. Exactly, Gloria, what you're saying. Like people,
Yeah.
especially entrepreneurs, oh, I want to write a book. Okay, everybody wants to write a book, but not everyone's an author. How are you an
Mm,
author? Especially in the nonfiction space, which is what I do, you have to find solutions for others, right? The best
yes.
nonfiction books find a solution for others. They serve.
Ooh, I'm gonna put that on a sticky note because that's really what I'm doing, and that's what you're doing,
Yeah.
and we are all finding a solution for others. And if you can lead with that, and not so much about cover me, because my story is more unique. It's not about your story being unique, but how your story has found a solution for others. That's so good.
Yeah,
Thank you.
you're welcome, Gloria. You know what I got once from actually a publicist told me, because I was like, well, why am I not getting picked up? I'm a woman entrepreneur,
Mm,
right? Business owner. It's time of COVID. Like everyone's talking about women-owned businesses, blah, blah, blah. And she said to me, there's thousands of you out there. Your story is not unique. And I like swallowed my tears. I felt a little like, what are we talking about? And I said, I didn't let that bother me. I actually was like, wait a second, I am unique. And this is why. And I had to sort of move beyond like a woman owned business. There's thousands of us, and realize what made me different was the idea of serving.
I love that. So your story is important, it's unique, but you need to lead with how are you finding a solution for others? And you can
Yeah.
draw people into your world that way. I
Yeah.
love that. Now we have a lot of authors, including yourself, in the PR Starter Pack. We have a lot of authors who are wanting to get their story out there. Do you have any industry insider advice on how they can either self-publish or kind of get their books off the ground?
Yeah. I mean, I am no expert in self publishing, and I'm probably a little uh, say with self-publishing, what is your why there? And I say, what is your why across the board, right? I actually just wrote. It's coming out in June for an MFA, and I'll send it to you, Gloria, when it comes out. I just wrote a really cool article for DIY MFA program piece about publishing, and it deals with like the different aspects: hybrid, self-publishing, traditional publishing, and why you would want to do it. And my biggest advice to people is that if you are an entrepreneur and a book is your brand, right? A book is your brand. As much as you're developing your brand, let's say you're doing a skin line care and you're taking real time to develop that skin line and make it perfect, that's what you also need to be thinking about as a book. It's not just like something you slap on a page and like load up a PDF and say, okay, I can self-publish a book. Really, my biggest advice to people is like, don't just have a family member or best friend read it. You need to hire experts minimum to really make sure, because it is your brand and you want to put your best brand, your best self forward.
Oh, that's so good. I love that. Now, you've done so many things and you're very accomplished, and in doing so, you've also built your own community. What is your goal for this year? I want to talk about your specific PR goals. You've been able to share on so many podcasts, share about your motherhood story on parents, on, industry. So what else do you still want to land in terms of media features?
Well, I'm going to use the word Forbes. Okay. So I was so obsessed with Forbes, I think, when I joined your group a year ago and I thought that's what I wanted. And I pitched Forbes all different angles, and I've gotten Forbes feedback and multiple opportunities to be on Forbes Council and pay for Forbes, and I've refused every single one. I've determined that when it comes to Forbes, I deserve to be there and I don't have to pay for the article. I could have paid for the article 6 months ago, guys. Okay? No
Yes.
problem. Seriously, you can take Gloria's class, you can come up with a great pitch. Forbes will totally publish you. You'll just have to pay for it. So, why I'm saying this on this podcast is this. I finally, through my life coach, I actually let go. I was so angry. I was like, oh my God, this was probably 2 months ago. I don't understand. I can't earn Forbes. It's been almost a year. And she was like, why are you so obsessed with this? And I was like, I don't know. I think I just want the logo on my website. I think it's really great. And that was the same thing about an Amazon bestseller. Like, why are you so obsessed with this? Like, what is it in your ego? And as soon as I let that kind of concept and said, you know what, forget it. Let's not, I'm not going to spend any more energy there. I got Business Insider, earned media
Yes.
and Business Insider, which felt amazing. I loved the article. It was for small businesses that they have a small business Insider like feature. The reporter was great, but I didn't even get that concept or open my brain to pitch them because I was so focused on Forbes. And then I think though right now I want to, of course I'd love to be in like Fast Company. We're growing. We were just shy $1 million last year at the Collective Book Studio. So
Woo!
I know, thank you. So there's some like $1 million goals, $2 million goals, and things like that I'm like really set on to get so that I can get on Fast Company. I'd love to be on Women Huffington Post. Motherly, I think is a great.
Oh, that should be, yeah, you should pitch that right away, especially since you've been on parents.
Yeah. So I think there's some
Yeah.
really good places that I have my sights set on 2022. I really would love to get some local media, some arts and culture stuff. In San Francisco Chronicle
Cool.
would be a dream. So I continually am trying that. But I also want to, I think for me in 2022, it is diving into arts and culture because we're so obsessed with, YouTube and TikTok and whatever else is on our phone. But how can we like really preserve arts and culture in a different way through the book? And I think I can kind of speak to that through my authors and what we do.
Ooh, there's your angle there. Now you got to dig into the starter pack and start pitching. I love it. I
So
love that angle.
really you do good because I just started to talk about that this week with the
Yeah.
team.
Preserving arts and culture in the age of TikTok and fast social media.
Ooh, can I get, okay, wait. You got to put that in the chat. That is definitely an angle. Yeah. Preserving art and culture
culture.
Yeah.
In the age of TikTok and fast social
Fast
media.
social media. Yeah, for
Mhm.
sure.
I love that. Well, you've been an incredible member and inspiring leader in our Facebook group, in our PR community. I'm so glad that the universe put us together, and I'm so impressed by the work that you're doing. And for anyone that's listening who may or may not be thinking about publishing, or maybe want to know a little bit more about what you do, how can they find you?
So really easy. I actually do manage my Instagram with someone else, but I answer most all the DMs myself. It's really important to me. So that's just at the Collective Book Studio. And then I'm also really active on LinkedIn. So we can put that in the show notes. And I love LinkedIn. You can definitely DM me there, connect with me there.
That's so nice and generous of you. That's awesome. Thank you so much. We're going to have you back on the show after you land all of those things that you talked about because it is absolutely 100% doable. I mean, remember when you didn't get even one press feature and now you're like, I want all these. So everything you imagine is real, okay? Everything you imagine is real. You just got to press that send button. So thank you so much for joining us and inspiring us today.
Yeah, thank you, Gloria.